This podcast is part of the Podcast Arcade Network.
Hello, and welcome to the Covert Nerd Podcast. Thank you for listening. It means a lot to me that you take the time out of your day to hear what I have to say. Today's another great episode. If you're looking to start something, not just a podcast like my guest Dave Jackson has done for the last 15 plus years, any project. I think all the philosophy and tips that he gives, that we give, apply to anything. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get some inspiration. And remember, go to covertnerd.net for all the different ways you can reach out to me via email, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. You can find past episodes there, all the contact information for today's episode. So without further ado, let's dive right in and nerd it up with Dave. I have Dave Jackson here with the School of Podcasting, and he is definitely one of the reasons I got into podcasting, because when I started thinking about it, I searched for a podcast about podcasting, and Dave was one of them, and I just stuck with him. And so I wanted to get him on the podcast because he is a Hall of Famer, and I think he can provide some insights not only to podcasting, but just expressing what you really love in audio format. So thanks for being on the show, Dave.
Oh, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. So let's just dive right in like I do on most episodes and get into the meat and taters, as they call it, and start with a question about, are there some things maybe that you did as a kid that later on as an adult you got back to later in life, like baseball cards or comic books or something like that?
Yeah, probably the one that I just never gave up on was the guitar. When I was born left-handed, which is kind of a pain in the butt if you just, for those who are not, because you can't find any scissors, you can't find a baseball mitt. And I was trying to play the guitar, and I remember when I was 5, because my brother played. My brother is 7 years older than I am, and my fingers were too small. But I would bang around on this little plastic piece of crap, and that really didn't work. But then later, when I really wanted to try to learn, it was almost like trying to learn guitar in a mirror, because everything was backwards. And I remember my brother, because he's my brother, was trying to help me out, and he actually strung the guitar strings kind of upside down so that it kind of looked like it did in the book, but it really didn't work. And so eventually I just woke up the one day and said, I can't find any scissors. I can't find a baseball mitt. This whole left-handed thing is for the birds. And I just quit. I just said, from this day forward, I dubbed me right-handed, which is great, because later when I picked the guitar back up when I was about in, I don't know, 4th, 5th grade, something like that, the hand you're really using when you're, quote, right-handed is your left hand on the guitar. So I think that's one of the reasons why I was a pretty good guitar player. But in terms of collectibles, probably the weirdest one, I used to collect banks. I don't know why.
Banks,
have
like
piggy
coin
banks.
piggy banks.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, which I guess is like the sign of an entrepreneur when you think about it. I had the movie King Kong had come out. Dino De Laurentiis, I think, was the guy. So I had a bunch of King Kong cards and Rocky cards, which I still have somewhere in a box somewhere. But and then you'd mentioned Star Wars and stuff. When Star Wars came out, I believe I was 12 or 13, and I saw that movie, if I remember right, 11 times, which is weird, because I think that's what you do, because there's nothing else to do. Like, you're 12 and it's like, well, I guess we could walk to the store or something, or ride our bikes or whatever. Because now if I like a movie, I never even think of, like, you know what I'm going to do? For the next week and a half, I'm going to go see that movie again.
Yeah.
Again.
Well, it came out in the summertime. So yeah. Tell us a little bit about what was the hype like? Because you lived through it. Did your friends say, hey, there's this cool movie and they've got these laser swords and this is awesome?
I think it was somebody, just the fact that which is funny, because you look at them now and you're like, wait, what? It's just the special effects were like, wow, that's amazing. And so I just remember going, the whole, like, my mom and my brothers and sisters went, and it's such a spoiler alert, the good guys kind of win at the end there. And you just have this great feeling, and everybody was cheering, and the music, and it just was such a great thing that the minute you got home, you're like, it was like a ride at an amusement park. Like, can we go ride it again? And so you did, and you get down to the movie, and you were like, and you'd see maybe a few little things, or you'd start to memorize lines, and just by the end of it, you would do it again and again and again and again. That and I remember at the time, I feel so old when I say this, but cable TV was new, and my cousin had it, and I hung out at my cousin's house, who also probably was in some of those times when we saw Star Wars. And I remember, for whatever reason, Grease was running. The movie Grease with John Travolta was running almost nonstop. It's like the only movie they had, and so I can recite that movie per nauseum as well. But I can't think of besides like The Sixth Sense, because if you've ever seen that movie, you have to see it again. And I won't explain why, but you got to watch that one twice. I can't remember the last movie I've watched twice that was like fairly, new. I think I'm always looking for the next one. It's like, oh, worried. It's that fear of missing out. Like, I could watch this one again, but that means I'm not gonna have time to watch this other thing, and this could be just in. Yeah, so you keep going on.
Oh man, I'm the same way. I have a difficult time reading the same book twice. Movies maybe not so much, because it's only a 2-hour commitment, but
right.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what are your, speaking of books, I guess, what are some of your favorite books of all time? So what's your Mount Rushmore, I guess, for the cliche of books of any genre?
Yeah, the nonfiction stuff would be Platform by Michael Hyatt, where he just talks about how to make wow content. And for probably the last 4 or 5 years, that's a January book for me. It's almost like when you hear a football coach or somebody go, we're going to go back to the basics and learn how to tackle and blah, blah, blah. That's one where I just kind of go, oh yeah, you know what? In the end, it's about making content that's so good, your audience is dying to share it. The other one, and I think this is only a year or two old, is Will It Fly by Pat Flynn. That is a great book that just so many people kind of I did a stupid thing once. This was back when you had CD-ROM, like tutorials would come on CD-ROM, and I was looking for a job, so I made this CD-ROM, and you would put it in, and it would come out, and you meet Dave Jackson, and music would start, and this little presentation would go, and at the end it would do a quiz, and it's like, the next step you should do is A, call and schedule a thing with Dave Jackson, B, call and schedule a thing with Dave Jackson, or C, and everybody that saw this, like, that is so creative and so different and so outside the box. You should sell those. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. So I went and bought a domain name, and I knew how to make websites and put it on sale. And then I did my market research. Now that's, for those of you at home, that's a little backwards. You usually do the market research first, then you build the product. And so after I'd gone through, the weeks of putting things up and getting graphics, I found out that not only were there other people making what I was calling a digital resume, but they were doing it much better and much cheaper. And I was like, oh, maybe I should have done a little research first. So Will It Fly is a great example of
what year was that? What year did you do that? I'm just curious.
Early 90s. Probably. It's like, I'm trying to think of when Front Page was big and popular. So
I guess that was 95, 94.
Yeah.
96, maybe 96 somewhere around at the most.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's when that was. I'm trying to think it, because I remember I was working at a company. I can't remember when I was there, but yeah, that was one that I was like, oh yeah, and next time maybe do a little research first. And I see that now all the time with podcasters, where they'll, my favorite is there's if you go into Apple and search for the podcast labeled Outside the Box, there are 6 of them, which I find somewhat ironic that, you're thinking so much outside of the box that you named the show that 5 other people already did. I was like, awesome. What are you going to do?
Well, there you go.
Those are probably some of my favorites. And then anything by Dave Barry. When I was growing up, Dave Barry had a column in the Parade magazine. And so the Sunday paper would come, and my dad would grab this, and my sister would grab the comics, and I would grab the Parade magazine. And Dave Barry is just, for lack of a better phrase, he's just a smart aleck. And for some reason, he just made me giggle and laugh. And I actually have, I'm working with his people. I'm like, you need a podcast, Dave Barry.
Oh, really?
But he's kind of retired. He's kind of like, and I'm like, oh, dude, come on, just read your old stuff. But we'll see. But so that was between Dave Barry. Anybody that was funny named Dave, apparently Dave Barry, and then later Dave Letterman were two guys that I just found were wacky, thinking outside the box, kind of creative, and super sarcastic. So
Truly thinking outside the box, not like those 6 other podcasts.
Exactly. Yeah. When Letterman was, dumping watermelons off the ceiling, and he did one thing, it was the suit of Velcro. So he had this entire suit made of Velcro, and he ran and just jumped onto a wall and got stuck. It was just
now they have those that you can go to, amusement parks or whatever, and they have those walls that you can stick to. I wonder if they stole that from him, I guess.
Probably. I know he had the suit of seltzer, which was this suit of Alka-Seltzer. And he got
That's
awesome.
Awesome.
This giant thing. So weird.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, speaking of, I guess, things from the childhood, what are 2 things that you learned as a child, maybe from your mom, your dad, your grandma, that you currently use in your podcasting career today?
Yeah, probably one is my grandpa. A weird story is I got a job through my school, my high school, and I ended up working at a grocery store. And I was telling my grandpa how I, here's where I'm working. And he said, is that, because it was called May Brothers. He goes, is that Stan May? And I go, yeah, that's the owner. He goes, he's an old friend of mine, because my grandpa was a Wonder Bread delivery guy. So he knew all the grocery store people.
Yeah.
And it was kind of interesting because my grandpa kind of took me aside in this kind of, for those of you that remember Walton's Mountain kind of moment, let me tell you about life, son. And he goes, look, and he actually said, come on now. He goes, first things first, you're a Jackson. And I was like, looking back, I'm like, really? You're a Jackson? He goes, you're a Jackson. And he goes, and when you go home, I want you to go home tired. And he goes, and you give everything you can to big success and blah, blah, blah. And don't let me down there. And I was like, so every time they'd be like, Dave, we need to get at carts. I was like sprinting to the, to the thing. So that's one. And then the other one, my mom was just hilarious. Again, another, we could just have pun offs forever. My mom trying to make each other just stupid, stuff. And I remember the one time we were just sitting there, and I was all of probably, I don't know, 22, and I'm feeling all grown up. And I kind of asked her, like, what was your philosophy on, raising? Because I think I turned out pretty good, Mom. What was the thing? And she just said, I usually kind of let you do whatever you wanted to do as long as it wasn't going to kill you. She then said, anytime things are kind of weird, she goes, if there's something in life where there's a shadow, shall we say, she said, I've always just had the attitude of where there's a shadow, there's a light, because you have to have the light to make the shadow. And she goes, I just prefer to look at the light. And I was like, I'm writing that down. That's a good one, Mom.
I like that.
So anytime something happens and you're like, the last time my background's in teaching. The bad news about being a teacher in the corporate world, I taught a lot of Microsoft Office and things like that. But every 7 years, they would get a bunch of sales guys that couldn't sell training for whatever reason. And instead of, I don't know, downsizing the sales guys, they would downsize the training department. And so the last time that happened, I was like, okay, what does this enable me to do? And I was like, well, I've always wanted to, have a job in podcasting. I like this podcasting thing. And made a couple phone calls. The next thing you know, I got a job in podcasting. So I was like, when I was married, there were many a curveball for me and my ex-wife. And anytime something would come up, we were like, well, this is going to be a fun adventure. It was just like, all right, let's see where this is going to take us, And so I think that's kind of the attitude you kind of just have to have, because to quote the immortal David Lee Roth, don't let it get to your head, because, life's a pain anyway. So just, roll with the punches.
You know a lot of Daves.
I do. That's, if you're Dave, it's what's the whole secret thing? Like attracts life. Apparently Dave attracts Dave. So
that's awesome. I guess that kind of segues into this then. Are there trials and tribulations maybe that you've gone through that helped in your, building your career over the last, say 20 years or so? You talked about, being married and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think my very first job. So before I got hired at May Brothers Supermarket, I was hired at Darrow's Foods, so another grocery store through my school. But when I was like 16, really even before that, I was painfully shy. Just like I put the in and introvert. And
Really?
yeah, so I got hired at this grocery store, and I was, I could throw groceries in a bag and the whole 9 yards and get carts. But they actually fired me after 2 weeks, I think it was. And the reason was I was too shy. He's like, you need to talk to the customers and, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, I'm just kind of. And so the teacher that got me the job pulled me in, and he's like, I heard what happened. And I'm like, yeah, I thought I was doing okay. And he's like, yeah, they said you're too shy. And I said, well, I talked to some people, blah, blah, blah. He goes, yeah, I know. He goes, but you're kind of, I see you in class. You're a shy kid. And he goes, here's what I want you to do. And I'm like, okay. At first he says, I want you to be like your friend Scott. Well, my buddy Scott, who's still my best friend, is like David Lee Roth. He's just outgoing man who, woo, what's going on, people? And
life of the party.
So it's kind of like, hey, Dave, can you grow a third arm? It's like, I don't know if I can be like my buddy Scott. But I said, yeah, I don't know if that's possible. I can try. And he goes, okay, here's what I want you to do. He goes, I want you to act the way you want to be. He goes, and then someday you'll be the way you act, which we now affectionately refer to as fake it till you make it. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll just pretend I'm outgoing. And so I started to, and because I think my mom's sense of humor kind of rubbed off on me, I could kind of make people giggle and laugh and things like that. So that always kind of felt good. And then about that time, I took a speech class. And that was one where, again, it was kind of fun because they're like, you need to do a talk on this. And I'm like, but what's the topic? Pick whatever you want. You have 3 minutes. It has to be a how-to thing or whatever it was. And so I wrote them purposely to be funny and entertaining. And so I would get up and people were like, oh, cool. Jackson's up. This is going to be great. Because I was just having a blast making people laugh. And that really kind of started to get me out of my shell. I'm still at heart, I can still be extremely shy. When I was married, I would go to my ex-wife's like Christmas party. And so she was a nurse. So all these nurses and doctors, and they are all talking language that I have no idea what they're talking about. And I would just, be very quiet. And all of a sudden my ex-wife would look over and she goes, oh no. And I'm like, what? And she goes, Shy Dave is here. She's like, come on, you can do it. Come with me. Come to the light. You can do this. And I was just like, and I still run into that at podcast events. I've been at different places where I know so many people now in podcasting, but if I go into a room and just for whatever reason, there's nobody that I know, I have to kind of grab me and go like, oh, I remember once I was at an event and it was a it was a speaker's like dinner. So it was just the speakers. Well, I go there to find clients. Who needs to start a podcast more than another speaker? And I was just sitting there and I looked at kind of like stepped out of myself. And I'd gotten as far away from the crowd as you could be. I was sitting there eating my dinner alone on a outdoor chair. We're outside. And I just looked up and I'm like, what are you doing? Why did you come here? You came here to get clients. Okay, where are your clients? Well, they're all standing over there. And I just had to tell myself, I'm like, okay, see that girl right there? Yep. Okay. Can you walk up to her and say, so what brings you to the event? And I'm thinking, yep, I can do that. That's all you have to do. Walk to her and say, so what brings you to the event? So I was like, okay, here we go. And the whole time there's a part of my brain that's like, I don't want to do that. I don't make me do it. No. So I finally, I just walked over and I'm like, so what brings you to the event? And we started talking and, it was like, boom. No big deal, but I'm still at times the introvert. It's kind of weird. And then once you get me talking, I won't shut up. So that's the fun thing.
That's interesting. We have a pastor, the church we go to, he said that he is comfortable on stage talking, but get him in a group of 3 or 4 people that he doesn't know. And he's like, I can't, it's hard. You're probably the same way. You get behind the microphone, you're fine.
Get me behind a microphone, get me on a stage, good to go. Get me in a group of 4 people. You do. And what's fun is when I do talks, I mean, I taught, that's what I did every day. I would go in and talk to a group of about 20 people. And it's not the number of people. I don't know why, but it's kind of fun because about 4 minutes before I talk, all the blood leaves my hands. My hands are ice cold. And I would just, all of a sudden I'd be like, I'll just rub in my hands and I look at my watch. I'm like, oh, that's why it's 4 minutes till I go on stage. But the minute I'm on stage, we're good to go. And part of it is I rehearse per nauseum when I do any kind of presentation. I usually have slides or things like that, but I really, really prepare because there's somebody in that audience that hasn't seen me talk yet. And I want them to go, that guy was like, have more of him next year. So I'm always going about that. So I want it to be like, but I also know that there's going to be something that my mouth just doesn't work. And so what I love is I'll be on like, I'll do something, yada, yada, yada. And all of a sudden especially my brain, I'll go on a tangent. I'll throw something in. I'm going to call an audible in the middle of my presentation. And I will do that. And sometimes that works. And there are other times where it's like, yeah, that didn't land where I thought it was going to. And as I'm talking, my brain goes, okay, it's not perfect. We can forget about being perfect. Just have fun with this and talk. So it's like, I remember once I got to be on TV, and which was really weird because they're like, your segment is 4 minutes. We're going to ask you 3 questions. Make sure it's in under 4 minutes. And I'm driving to Cleveland to do this. And I'm practicing my answers over and over and over, trying to make sure that it doesn't sound like I have rehearsed my answer so much, but yet trying to get there. And I think I said, I was supposed to talk about books. I think for whatever reason, I was going to use the word books. And I said magazine. My brain just decided to, let's throw in magazine instead. And I said magazines. I said, or books, or newspapers, media print. And again, my brain goes, okay, it's not perfect. You can relax now and let's just keep rolling. So it's always kind of fun when there's so much going on in your brain when you're either doing a podcast or an interview. Like right now, you're sitting here trying to remember, like, what's the next question while you're still listening to me. I'm sitting here going, Dave, you haven't let this guy say a word in about 3 minutes. You need to shut up. There's so many things going on in your brain while you talk. So it's always fun when you're on stage or doing a podcast or whatever.
I think you kind of get into the zone when you're in a comfortable spot and you just kind of shut out everything else. But getting in a situation, like you said, with a group of people you don't even know, it's really foreign to you. You've trained yourself for, like in your case, for 20, 30 years of being in front of people and talking.
Yeah, it's always, you never know. A lot of it depends on who your audience is. I remember I did a session at the Military Influencer Conference, and I expected to walk into a room of military dudes with short hair and big shoulders, and I walked in and it was all their wives. It was like the audience was easily 80% female. One of the things I do is when I do a presentation, I get there early, and when people come in and sit down, first of all, I always thank them. Hey, there are a lot of sessions you could be at. Thanks for sticking around for me. Is there anything in particular you're looking to learn? Because rule number 1 is, who the heck am I talking to? And that's where I found out that military wives kind of get a bum deal many times because they get a job because they have a degree or whatever. They get a job, and 2 years into their job, as they're slowly climbing the corporate ladder, the love of their life get transferred to wherever, and okay, we're back to square one. And so they all kind of figured out, hey, if I can get a job that, whether it's consulting or whatever, because I've got all this experience now, I've got 10 years in whatever the industry is. It's 2 years here, 2 years there, 2 years here. And they're like, if I could do this online, I can move where I want, and now I don't lose my seniority. So that was always kind of fun. But it's one of those where you expect an audience to be one thing, and you walk in, you're like, huh, all right, what's the deal here? Yeah. So it's always keeps you on your toes.
Shift gears. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to segue back to what you said about the picking a speech topic when you were a kid. When it comes to podcasting, what do you think about the subject? Do you need to find a topic that people are interested in, or do you need to find a topic that you're interested in? What do you think?
Hands down, you have to love the topic. And the reason why is I'm doing one right now. I've always wanted to do a local podcast because I looking at it on paper, like, oh, this would be great, hyper niche, and I could interview the local businesses, and then it's got to be easy to get advertisers because Luigi's Pizza, all these hyper Akron stuff. And I started it. Well, first of all, I started it, and then COVID hit. So that made things, well, so much for interview. Yeah.
That's the name of 2020. I started it and then COVID.
But the other thing was, it dawned on me, I could care less about it. I mean, I love where I live. It's a great town and all, but I'm not like, oh, I can't wait I want to dig into the history and I want to, meet the mayor. And I'm like, no, not really. It's just one of those where it's like, So, and I've tried, I did a podcast about customer service once. And because that was my background, before I was a instructor, I started off in customer service, and I would actually go around, was still teaching. I was teaching people how to run copy machines, but my official term was customer service rep. And so I decided I was going to do a show on customer service. And you have these delusions of grandeur. And I'm like, I'm going to start this podcast. People are going to hear it. They're going to want to hire me. I'm going to go out and do presentations on customer service. And I will be the podcast, guru when it comes to customer service. And I did about, I think, 6 episodes of that. And I just sounded like a grumpy old man. I was just like, I went into this place today and they didn't even greet me when I walked in. And then, it's like, and I was just like, it was like, that's a case where it was my job, but it wasn't my passion. And after a while I was like, yeah,
And nobody really wants to hear complaining all the time.
No, it's, I will occasionally take those episodes if I want to test like a new media host or something. I'm like, hey, let's resurrect this old show from, 2007. But yeah, the passion, you need that, because when you first start out, if you think about anything you ever do, tying your shoes, shooting a basketball, whatever it is, it always takes more time the first time you do it. So you've just spent 6 hours working on a 20-minute podcast, and you finally get the nerve and you publish it out there, and it's out, and oh my gosh, I'm in Apple and I'm in Google and all this other stuff. And then you go to your stats and you're like, wow, I have 14 downloads. And you're like, it took me 6 hours to get the Akron podcast right now, I think, has 21 downloads, and it's like per episode, So I'm like, but that's a classroom of people. That's where my teaching comes into play. I'm like, that's a classroom of people that could be listening to, AM, FM, satellite radio, HBO, Apple Plus, Disney Plus, Netflix, and they chose to listen to you. But if you don't have that passion to talk about it because that's what you want to talk about, and I'll talk about it to nobody for free, or in some cases it costs you $20 a month to talk about it. Exactly. You're not gonna last.
I took Toastmasters for several years, and that's one of the things we talked about was when you're picking a speech topic, don't pick something you think your audience will love. Pick something that you love, because your audience will hear your excitement about what you're talking about. I totally agree with that. That's the mindset you need to have. And as a confidence booster, you're doing a speech in front of people, and very few other people can do that. So you're doing something that very few people out there can do. So that should give you some confidence that you're doing something 90% of the population, or whatever that number is, doesn't want or is too afraid to do. And I think podcasting is the same way. Getting in front of the mic and hitting that publish button, like you said, is not always easy sometimes. So you're doing something pretty unique.
Yeah. And I saw this in a Facebook group. Somebody said, what's I forget how they phrased it, but it was kind of like, what's the topic that's the easiest to monetize? So in other words, they were looking to make money quickly.
Yep.
And I was just like, wow, that is so the wrong way to go about it. Because
it is
step one of making, if you want to make money with a podcast, and you don't have to, but if you do, step one is grow your audience. And then you take that audience and try to monetize it. And they're like, well, step one is monetize. And I'm like, monetize what? You don't have an audience yet.
Yes, exactly.
So when I hear that attitude, I was like, well, I don't want to be the person that's going to, poo-poo the idea, but that's probably not going to work. At least it doesn't for 99.9% of people.
And you can smell that, because when I was searching for podcasts about podcasting, I found lots of shows that it was just basically one big advertisement for their, pay me $200 and I'll get you in the top 5 in your category or whatever. And that's why, Dave, I really appreciate you. I didn't get that sleazy, slimy feel that I need a chemical shower after I listen to this guy's podcast, because it's just trying to sell me something.
Yeah, I had a client the other night, was our first meeting, and he said, so like, what do you do like when you're not working? And I go, this. And he goes, but really, like, what do you do for fun? And I go, this.
This.
And he's like, and he finally just said, oh, I get it. He goes, you really just love this. And I go, yeah. I go, it scratches every itch I have. I go, it's creative, it's kind of geeky, and I get to help people. I go, other than that, there's not much more to me. And I go, so my sister-in-law always says you're a workaholic. And I said, just because I'm in my office doesn't mean I'm working. I said, I know it looks like I'm working and smells like I'm working. I said, but if I'm helping people, I said, that puts a lot of gas in my tank. So
does that, I guess, mean that if a listener listening right now has a real niche topic, maybe they want to talk about DC Comics in 1981, which would be real niche, is, I suppose, being more niche, in your opinion, would be better than a mile wide and an inch deep? Or what do you think about niche topics?
Yeah, it always comes back to, why are you starting a podcast? Like, I had one guy, I helped him start a podcast about comic books. And when I was working with him, he goes, I know, like, the one thing we need is another podcast about comic books. He goes, but here's the deal. He goes, my wife is tired of talking about comic books. My brother and sister are kind of like, we don't care about Batman. Yeah. And he goes, so go find some people who want to talk about this stuff. So that's why he started the podcast. So it kind of depends. If the goal is money, then you have to think, okay, the more niche you get, the smaller the audience, but the more loyal the audience. But also, does that audience have money? And like, we all love Pop-Tarts, but can I make a money like doing a pop? Like, okay, let's niche down. Okay, I'm going to do a brown sugar cinnamon podcast, Pop-Tart. That's, it's niche in the people that are like, oh, dude, I remember the first time I had my first ever brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tart. I'm like, but that's going to be hard to monetize. I had a client, she did a show. She had a son who was pretty high on the autism spectrum, and she loved Disney. So she did a show called Special Mouse, because she was an expert. I mean, if you asked her about any kind of Disability Act kind of details, she had it down, and it was all about how to take people with special needs to amusement parks. And she didn't have huge numbers, but she had a private Facebook group, and all these people were like, I thought I was the only person going through this. And so when you find your other people, and that's so powerful, just to go, I used to feel alone and I don't anymore. That is huge. And she actually found a sponsor, because there was somebody in Florida that specialized in, you guessed it, transporting people with special needs. So, she didn't have a huge audience, but she was able to get a sponsor. So yeah, it really depends. I think my favorite niche example is, there's a guy that does a show on chameleon breeding. And I was like, wait, what? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I build cages for chameleons, and then we talk about chameleon breeding. And I go, did you say chameleon breeding? And he goes, yep. And what was interesting is, his manufacturer, the guy who was working to actually build the cages, said, can you kind of quit talking about the cages on the podcast, because we're having a hard time keeping up. And he actually was going to do that. And I said, no, my friend, you get a different manufacturer or an additional one or something like that. But his audience had said that, we could buy a cage from overseas and it would be cheaper, but we actually want to buy it from you because you've given so much to the chameleon community. Yeah. And I thought that was just a great example of what people call the law of reciprocity. So I've more or less scratched your back. You feel compelled to scratch mine. So, or the value for value model that Adam Curry talks about. So,
no, I love that. I think there is a lot to be said about dialing down, but yeah, figuring that out might take a little bit of work. But I know you talk about that all the time on your podcast, about you're not going to get any better until you try. So maybe you try a Pop-Tart podcast for 6 months and just doesn't work out. But
yeah, this isn't my thing. Yeah. I just started a new podcast because I needed to test another thing. And it's called New to Cooking, because I am not a cook. And so, and it's already, it's half off the rails. I can't come up with a schedule that's going to work for me. But it was just one there where I was like, well, I'm going to try this, and let me try this product. What if I try to sell this as an affiliate, which again is stupid, because step one is grow an audience. I don't have an audience, but I'm putting things in place to test with it. And I've already kind of found out that, there's a reason why I don't cook. I don't like to do it that much, but I'm hoping if I do more of it, I will find some tips and tricks and things like that. So, throw it on the wall. You never know.
Exactly. Well, what's a project that you created that when you got done, you're like, wow, this looks great. I love it. I think this turned out really well.
It's weird because as much as I will say at times I am the king of typos, I at times can be super. I think we're all hypercritical on ourselves, so that I don't know that I ever look back and go, "Oh, that was good." When I was in a band, I remember we were in the studio and I was going in to cut some lead guitar work, and I get done the first time, and the band's like, "That was great, man." I was like, "Oh no, hold on, we got to do that one again." Seriously, 17 times, and they're just like, "How do we make him stop?" And they're like, "That was all." I'm like, "I wasn't feeling it. Let's do it again." And so finally, after the 17th time, I was like, "Yeah, I kind of felt that one of my toes. Let's keep that one." And they're like, "Finally," So I am a bit of a perfectionist. It's I don't know what you call it. My ex-wife pointed this out to me once. We're at a podcast event, and it's kind of cool. And you're bringing your wife around, and people just come up, go, and just keep praising you. They're like, "Dave, it's so great to meet you. Oh my gosh," And the one time she looked at me, she goes, "I don't know if you know this or not." And I go, "What?" She goes, "You are horrible at accepting compliments." And I go, "Really?" She goes, "These people come up to you," and she goes, "You always have some," she goes, "It's funny. You'll like somebody will say like, hey Dave, you're really funny." And I'll always say something like, "Well, looks aren't everything." And and she goes, "But you never," she goes, "Have you ever thought of just saying thank you? Thanks for she goes, "You always have some sort of offhanded comment, self-deprecating." She goes, "You need to learn how to just say thank you." So I think that might be part of it, that somehow ties in that there are just times when I'm just not done with it. I think that's the other thing. One of my mantras when I got out of college, the first place I worked for, in giant letters on the wall, you walked in, there was this giant mural that said constant improvement. That was like the company's thing, was like, how can we make this better? How can we be more efficient? Which is that's a great mantra to have, but it also means you're never finished. So there are times I don't know that I ever stop and go, "Well, Ed, we're done with that." It's always like, "Well, we could do this, we could do that." When I was the last band I was in, we just got lucky. We had a whole bunch of people in, and because I've been in bands that people like, "Can I come see your band?" And I'm like, we're really not that good. But we had some really talented people, and we got along good. And that was when I was like, "Yeah, come on out." We were called the Sugar Daddies, and we played blues and swing and things like that. Yeah. Oh, the funny thing was, we first of all, we almost got sued by the Charms Company because we had thesugardaddies.com, because Sugar Daddies, it turns out, was not our website, and you had to be 18 to get into it.
Oh, one of those websites.
Yeah. So we would be on our stage and we'd be like, "Hey, if you want to check out our schedule, go to thesugardaddies.com," which is not our website anymore. Probably some Chinese company took it over or whatever. But yeah, so that was one that I was kind of like, all right. It was also a fun thing because I learned how to grow an audience kind of from that, which was do the little things that nobody else does. But it was also great. So we built this up, and we actually got to play some really great big venues of thousands of people. And then all the stuff that we did that made us great, we quit doing. And we just watched it crumble away. And I was like, "Yeah, we don't learn new songs anymore. We're not playing little venues because, we're too big to play there." And it's like, "Oh, that's not a good attitude." So yeah, but it's a lot of times the things that really grow an audience. When I hear people go, "Oh, I can't compete with that big company." And I'm like, "Yes, you can." Because there's the little things that they can't do, like cereal. The people at Cereal are not answering every email because they get gazillions probably.
Yep.
So reach out to those people and do the little things that they can't. So
I agree. You were talking earlier about the not getting it done, or you wanted to do the song 17 times. I think one of your Dave-isms is "perfect is the enemy of done." I don't know if that's a Dave original or is that somebody else's?
It's one I agree with, because I see people all the time that, "Oh, if I could just get the right music. I'm ready to launch my podcast, but we're waiting on the artwork, or, I got to find the perfect font." And I'm like, you could always change the font later. You could, and because they were literally, I mean, I've met people that have been, quote, working on their podcast for 3 years and they haven't launched yet. And I'm just like, come on, one of my favorite lines is from Kevin Hart. He goes, you can practice your jokes all you want in the basement. He goes, you don't know you're funny till you get on stage. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where on one hand, I'm always trying to be perfect, but I'm much better at that than I used to be, because there are times I just resurrected again, because I'm testing more stuff. I resurrected an old podcast, and for a while, for about 2 weeks, it had episodes that were years old and ridiculously out of date. And as I'm like, all right, I'm going to delete those later. And old me would have been like, no, you can't leave those up. It's going to damage your brand when people realize that you're talking about, technology that's 8 years old and doesn't exist anymore. And I was like, nobody's going to find this. I'm not promoting it. It's one podcast out of 1,200,000. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's safe that it's not going to get found. So yeah, I've made some improvement on that, but I probably still, again, there's always room for improvement.
Well, I appreciate that about you, because that was one of the things when I got started. I'm just like, you know what? It's done enough. I think Leo Laporte said it in This Week in Tech. He said when he built websites, he would say the website's done enough, because you can just keep picking and picking and picking, and you just have to say, it's done enough. I'm just going to let it go.
And the other thing is, no matter what you're doing, whether it's podcasting or building websites or whatever, there's nothing you can do, because this is a fact. When you get 6 months, 10 months away from when you launched, you're probably going to look at something and go, yeah, that needs changed, or it's not going to be in the direction you set off for due north. And all of a sudden you're like, your audience is like, hey, can we go a little east and a little more east? And all of a sudden you look up, you're like, man, like this is cool. And I'm getting, all this great feedback, but this is not where I thought it was going to go. Sure. So I think you kind of have to learn to roll with the punches with a bit, and it's and that's, I think, half the fun. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think that's the other thing is, if you're going to fail, I have a thing because I'm doing this right now. I have another idea for another membership site. Okay. And I've done some research. I've talked to people, and there's a part of me that goes, I really think this could work. I want to give this a shot. And there's a voice in my head now that goes, you've been thinking about this for about 2 months now. Like, let's come up with that minimal viable product, throw it out there, and it's either going to get interest or it's not. And it's one of those things where you read these business books and they're like, if you tell somebody your business idea and they're like, can I sign up now? That's a good idea. And if they go, oh, that sounds cool, that you really haven't figured out what your audience wants. And so there is a part of me that's like, I haven't had anybody go, when can I sign up for this? I need this now. So there's a part of me that's like, maybe it's not that good an idea. But on the other hand, it's something I am passionate about. I still think it'll fly. And I'm just like, all right, well, there's only one way, you can look at the recipe all day until you cook that bad boy. You don't know if it's going to fly or not. So
you're exactly right.
Yeah, I gotta take my own advice. So a friend of mine is going to help me with it, and we've got about 10 people. We're going to do some more market research to, again, figure out what people need, what they want, because we think like this should work. A great example of this is I have a book coming out next month, and Daniel J. Lewis is a friend of mine. He does a show called The Audacity to Podcast, and Daniel builds really beautiful websites. And Daniel was lucky enough that he named his show The Audacity, meaning the courage to podcast. But there's also a free software called Audacity. So all these people came to his podcast thinking it was about this free software, which it kind of was in the beginning, but more about the courage, really. And so Daniel thought, well, this is great. I've got all these people, and now I can start marketing my web design services. Except, as you might imagine, people that are looking for free software are not looking to spend 4 figures on a website. It's a case where he was like, all right, I have an audience. What are they really into? Well, they're really into podcast reviews. Apparently, they obsess over them all the time. They're trying to get found in iTunes all the time. And so he created a tool to have reviews get sent to you. He created a course on SEO, search engine optimization for podcasters. And then he recently, a couple of years ago, created he created a plugin to make it easy to subscribe. And these are all based on feedback from his audience. So sometimes, you come in and you go, look, everybody, it's apple pie. And they all go, oh, we're allergic to apples. What else you got? And you're like, I don't know. What do you want? You got pecan pie? I can go make some. And you come back and find out what they want and give it to them.
Well, you kind of touched on it there about debating over different things. And in the nerd community, of course, you have debating over Marvel versus DC, who's better, Captain Kirk versus Picard. And so what are the common arguments in the podcasting community?
The one right now, because it is changing, is like Joe Rogan, as of I think it's September, is going to only be available in Spotify. And people are going, well, then it's not a podcast because he doesn't have an RSS feed. And technically, that's true. There are people that talk about, there's a guy, Nurse Chris, had a thing at Podcast Movement. This guy's like royalty to his followers. Like there's a Nurse Chris cruise kind of thing, like huge audience. And everybody loves the Nurse Chris podcast. There's only one weird thing. Nurse Chris doesn't have a podcast. He has a YouTube channel. But his audience thinks it's a podcast. And that's where I go back to, I've been through years of marriage counseling. And there's a thing where if your spouse, let's say your spouse thinks you're neglecting them, and you can write up a list of all the different ways that you are not neglecting them. But if they feel neglected, guess what? That's a reality. That's what they feel. And trying to explain it to them is not going to work. And I always say, if your audience thinks YouTube is a podcast, guess what? YouTube's a podcast, And so I think I get it. And I think some of that discussion comes from, I think we're worried that RSS is going to go away and it's open source. And I mean, there are people that have been, in the cancel culture, there are people that have been canceled, but they still have a podcast because you can kick me out of Apple and this and that. There are manual ways to still get the show. So I think people don't want to lose that option. And I understand that. That's a valid fear. I just don't think I'm like, we have 1 million podcasts. We have, I think, 4 that are going to be exclusive. Like, let's not worry about it too much at this point. So that's a fun little thing that people like to nerd out over and things like that. So it's like, yeah, to me, it's like, look, we're all content creators. If we, they just Gone with the Wind was just in the news when all this, Black Lives Matters came up. And if you think about it, Gone with the Wind, and the only reason I know this is that was my mom's favorite movie, but Gone with the Wind was a movie, but it was also a VHS, probably a laser disc. Back for these big silver things called Laserdisc before DVDs. That's been a DVD, and I know it's on Blu-ray. So, to me, it's a quote movie, but really it's content. So how it's delivered, I think, doesn't really, in the end, let's not argue about it and just say, is that good or not? Yes, it is. Okay, well, this is how I consume it.
Well, for the person who's listening right now, then maybe they're on the fence about starting a podcast. What are maybe 2-3 things that they can do as soon as they're done listening to this and get the ball rolling on that podcast?
Yeah. One thing I always tell people to do is just take your phone, pretend. I mean, I have tapes of me when I was 5 and 6 with my grandma doing WHOME, a radio station, and she was interviewing me just to get used to talking to nobody in some cases if you're going to do a solo show, and then listen back so that you can go, ugh, is that how I really sound?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to like the way you sound. That is science. You can't fix that, because when you hear yourself now, you hear yourself through your ears, but also through your skull. And if you don't believe me, put your fingers on your forehead and talk, and you'll feel where it's vibrating. And that's kind of like a subwoofer. So your voice is actually much bassier when you talk, but when you actually hear your voice through a speaker now, that skull vibrating stuff, the fun word is bone conduction, which I still say is a great name for like a heavy metal band. This Sunday, Bone Conduction.
That's awesome.
But that's not there. So all of a sudden you sound very thin and you just sound different. Like my ex-wife could not get over that. She hated the sound of her voice. So get that over there, and just realize so many people think, well, people are going to say negative things. And for the most part, like if you do a political show, yep, you're going to lose 50% of your audience. If you do a religious show, some people are going to argue with that. I mean, I have a person I'm going to be interviewing in the future, and she does a show about fitness and diet. And if you think about it, that's a really, I mean, the paleo people versus the vegans versus
Yeah.
the, you know,
Keto
and
or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing you have to keep in mind is if people don't agree with what you're saying, there's a really good chance they're not going to listen. They don't like go get pitchforks and torches to, you know, they're just like, that guy's an idiot. And they, you know, swipe left and delete.
Yep.
So I don't really think that's
Unsubscribe.
much.
Yep.
Yeah. And you know, and then just again, the big questions I always say is, why am I doing this? If you can't explain why, then don't. Figure out who you're talking to, because really starting a podcast is not hard. Starting a good podcast is hard, because you have to figure out who's my audience and what do I want them to do. And that could be laugh, have fun. It could be I want them to see me as an expert. It could see I want them to take my message to the world because we need to get this out. But we have to figure out why am I doing this, and who am I talking to, and then what do we want them to do. And that's the tough part, is the where's the part in the middle that I can say this and hold their attention while getting them to do this. And that's where you have to go, I got to think about that a second. So that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, I agree. I think you've got some great advice, and I know you've got the School of Podcasting.com that people can go to if they want to find out more. Is that right? Or what else?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Yeah, schoolofpodcasting.com. And if you want to see all things Dave, powerofpodcasting.com has most of my podcasts. I have some that are just blatantly testing me, I could care less about, that I don't put those on there. But most of the ones that are about podcasting, or at least I take a little more time to take it a little more serious, are at powerofpodcasting.com.
I've got to ask, does the Bernie podcast still get downloads? Bernie the cat.
Bernie the cat still gets downloads. Yes.
That's awesome.
It's weird. Yeah. Not a ton, but, and those, here's the great thing, because Bernie has gone to the big litter box in the sky. I'm so happy I have whatever it is, 7 episodes of Bernie the cat, because if I'm having a really bad day at work and I'm like, hold on, where's the one where Bernie wants to go to Disneyland? Because the cat, I would be if I left for any period of time, it could have been, you know, an hour at the grocery store. I would come home, and he was very vocal about the fact that he was not happy that I had left. And I started walking in the door and just hitting record on my phone and running to the cat as he would go, Rah! And then I would just go, what's the matter, Bernie? And he would, Rah! You know, and did you have a party in here? It's awful messy. Rah! You know, so it was, yeah. And I just had, I just did an episode where I asked my audience, what's your favorite episode? And a guy named Darwin Dave does a show called dealingwithyourgrief.com, I believe, is if I remember right. And he interviewed his mom, and, you know, fast forward a year after the interview, and she's no longer with us. So I always tell people, if your parents are around, you will thank me in the future. Go interview them, because half the fun of that is there's this weird dynamic, because you're the interviewer and they are the interviewee, that you might get into subjects that you might feel weird talking to your parents about. But because it's an interview, I'm going to ask you now, Mom. So, like, how did you meet Dad? And, you know, what were your first impressions? And that's the other thing I guess we should say. You don't have to have a radio voice. You know, you don't have to sound, hey, traffic and weather on the 10s, everybody. One of my favorite things, there's a guy named Dr. Dave, and does Shrink Rap Radio. And Dr. Dave kind of sounds like this. Hey, welcome to Shrink Rap. But the cool thing about it is the minute you hit play and you go, all right, today we're going to be talking about science. Like, wow, that's Dr. Dave. I know that voice anywhere. So if you sound like everybody, you know, if you're unique, that's a beautiful thing. So don't worry about it. Todd Cock from Geek News Central will be the first person to say I don't have a radio voice, but aloha, welcome to New Media Show. He kind of talks up here. Rob Greenlee. Yes. Rob Greenlee is a guy that I love. Rob, and every now and then, everything he says sounds like it's a question, but it's not a question, you know, kind of thing. And it's just so. But when you hear him, you're like, "That's Rob." There we go. Yes.
Well, that's the good thing about podcasting is you can always go back and edit. You can't change your voice necessarily. Well, you can, but you can always cut out the filler words and everything else. So when I podcast, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go back and clean this up a little bit. So you don't have to worry about making a mistake.
That's it. It's not live radio. That's the when you talk to radio people, because there are some people that will do a podcast and they're like, I don't edit, man. I keep it real. I hit record, I hit stop, and I post it. And if you say that to a radio person, I'm like, wait, you have the ability to edit and you don't? And radio people, their brains just explode because they're live on the radio, and there are times when they're like, oh, I want to edit this. It's a train wreck. And the fact that we can and people choose not to, it's like, well, that's the joys of it's your show. You can do with it, whatever you want. So
bottom line is just start. I think that's what you always say. Just start.
Yeah. You don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start to be great. So
there you go. You did it.
It's an old line from Zig Ziglar. So
one of the many Dave-isms. Well, I guess, you borrowed it from Zig. Zig probably borrowed it from someone else.
Yeah.
Well, cool. We'll put a pin in this one, Dave. I really appreciate it. You are, again, inspiration for me. The reason I started a podcast, and I know many others can say the same thing. So thank you, Dave, for School of Podcasting and everything that you do.
Oh, thanks, man. This was a blast. Thanks for having me.
It was such an honor to sit down with Dave. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Again, like in the episode I talked about, I really got some inspiration from him. So I hope you did too. Again, go to covertnerd.net for all the information on how to reach out to me. If you like this episode, didn't like this episode, if you have ideas for future episodes, let me know. I appreciate your time. And again, until next time, nerd it up.